Crystal glasses clinked under the chandeliers as my husband shoved divorce papers into my hands right in the middle of the company Christmas party. He thought he was trashing a useless housewife to chase the vice president's daughter, completely unaware that the trembling woman holding the pen was actually the true owner of the corporation. I did not sign those papers to surrender. I signed them to trigger the trap I had spent 5 years building to crush his arrogance into dust. My name is Mallory Hayes, and standing alone in the center of the Affection Dynamics ballroom at 32 years old, I felt less like a wife and more like an unwanted stain on a pristine silk sheet. The air in the penthouse venue was thick enough to choke on, heavy with the scent of amber, musk, and the metallic tang of raw ambition. Around me, the New York elite preened in haute couture gowns that cost more than my grandmother's entire life savings. While I smoothed the fabric of a dress I had purchased off the rack 3 years ago, I could feel their eyes sliding over me, sharp and dismissive, dissecting my worth based on the complete lack of diamonds at my throat. Preston Sterling, the man I had vowed to love until death, was currently on the other side of the room. He was a rising regional sales director, shining under the crystal chandeliers, and he had made sure to leave me isolated near the buffet table while he charmed the upper management. I took a sip of lukewarm water, trying to swallow the painful lump in my throat, when a shadow fell over me. You really have no shame, do you? I turned to see my mother-in-law, Eleonora, clutching a glass of champagne like a weapon, her lip curled in undisguised disgust as she scanned my outfit from head to toe. Preston is out there trying to build a future. And you show up looking like a beggar, she hissed, keeping her voice low so the nearby investors would not hear her venom. If you had any dignity, you would leave before you ruin his chances completely. I did not reply to her. I was too busy watching Preston. He was leaning in close to Jessica, the daughter of the vice president. She was laughing, her hand resting possessively on his bicep. Everyone in the room knew the rumors. Jessica was the golden ticket to the future chief executive officer position. Preston was not just flirting. He was interviewing for a promotion using his charm as currency. Suddenly, Preston looked up, caught my eye, and marched over. He did not smile. He grabbed my elbow, his grip bruising, and steered me toward a dimly lit alcove near the emergency exit. It was private enough to talk, yet public enough that everyone could see he was handling his wife. Smile, he commanded through gritted teeth. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick red envelope. I got you a Christmas present. My heart fluttered with a pathetic spark of hope. I took the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. Preston. Thank you. I didn't think open it. I tore the seal. Inside, there was no holiday card. There was a stack of legal documents. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. I froze. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Preston. What is this? He leaned in, his expensive cologne smelling sickeningly sweet. It is exactly what it looks like. I am done. Mallory, I am going to be the next director, and I need a wife who fits the part, not whatever this is. I looked down at the terms. I would leave with nothing. No alimony, no assets. I won't sign this. I can't live on nothing. Preston's face twisted into a cruel sneer. Oh, you will sign it. Right now. If you don't, I will pull the plug on the payments for your grandmother's nursing home by tomorrow morning. She will be on the street in the snow before you can pack your bags. The cruelty took the breath from my lungs. He knew my grandmother was the only family I had left. He was using a dying woman to blackmail me into a quick divorce so he could announce his freedom to Jessica tonight. You are a monster, I whispered, hot tears blurring my vision. I am a winner. Mallory. Now, sign the damn paper. I pulled a pen from his pocket. My hand shook violently as the weight of his betrayal crushed me. I looked at him one last time, searching for the man I married, but saw only a stranger consumed by greed. I pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the nib sounded like a knife carving through bone. I signed my name. The tears fell onto the paper, but inside my chest, something snapped. This signature was not just an act of surrender. It was the violent end of my patience. Preston snatched the ink-stained papers from my hand with the speed of a viper striking its prey. A smug, victorious grin stretched across his face as he tucked the document into his breast pocket, patting it with satisfaction. He believed he had just secured his freedom. He had absolutely no idea that my signature was not merely an agreement to separate. It was a digital key. By signing my full legal name on that specific line, I had just authorized the Omega Protocol. The crowded ballroom seemed to blur as my mind drifted back 8 years. I was not the quiet, submissive housewife then. I was a ghost in the machine, a 24-year-old programming prodigy forced into the shadows by a university scandal that I did not commit. My rivals had framed me, destroying my reputation, but they could not destroy my code. I built the entire core operating system of Apexian Dynamics in a damp, windowless basement while eating instant noodles. I operated under the pseudonym Founder M, a name whispered with reverence in Silicon Valley, while the physical world only saw a disgraced student. That was when Preston found me. He was just a charming economics student back then, handsome and ambitious, but lacking the technical intellect to match his dreams. He needed a graduation project that would dazzle his professors. I gave him the algorithm. I let him present it as his own because I was in love. I was foolish enough to believe that we were a team. I stepped back into the domestic shadows, playing the role of the supportive wife so he could shine in the spotlight. For years, I maintained a perfect firewall between my two lives. To Preston, I was just a failing freelance coder who struggled to make a few $100s a month. He often mocked my lack of ambition. He never suspected that the work I did on my laptop was actually me managing a global investment empire through a complex web of shell companies. I owned 51% of the voting stock of Apexian Dynamics. Every major decision, every pivot, and every acquisition passed through me. Mr. Harrison, the current CEO, was the only person in the world who knew my face. To everyone else, I was a myth. I watched Preston adjust his tie, preparing to walk toward the stage. He looked so confident. He truly believed he was a visionary. He did not realize that the brilliant strategies he bragged about at board meetings were ideas I had planted in his head over dinner the night before. You should really focus on the Asian markets next quarter. I would suggest while passing him the mashed potatoes. Don't bore me with your simple thoughts. Mallory, he would reply with a sigh, only to repeat my exact words to the board the next morning and claim a massive bonus for it. But the betrayal was no longer just about his ego or his infidelity. My forensic algorithms had flagged the irregularities months ago. Preston was not just sleeping with Jessica. He was draining company funds to buy her jewelry and fund their lavish getaways. He was stealing from me. He was stealing from the very empire I built to protect us. I reached up and wiped the last tear from my cheek. The sadness that had consumed me for the last hour evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The trembling in my hands stopped completely. Go on. Preston, I whispered to myself, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. Go take your bow. He stepped into the light of the stage, waving to the crowd like a conquering hero. He thought he was ascending to the throne. He did not know he was walking directly onto the scaffold I had just finished building. Preston ascended the stairs to the main stage with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the world. He took his place at the center podium, flanked immediately by Jessica and her father, the vice president. They stood together like a royal family, looking down on the rest of us with benevolent arrogance. Preston tapped the microphone twice, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight, Preston boomed, his voice smooth and practiced. He slipped an arm around Jessica's waist, pulling her close in a display of intimacy that made my stomach turn. Before we celebrate our record-breaking year, I want to share some personal news. Tonight marks a new chapter for me. I have finally resolved the personal burdens that have been holding me back. I am now fully free to dedicate myself to this family. The Apexian family. The implication was clear. I was the burden. I was the anchor he had cut loose. The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic. I watched as people I had known for years, colleagues who had eaten my roast chicken at dinner parties, women who had cried on my shoulder about their own marriages, clapped the loudest. They turned their backs on me, isolating me in a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. In their eyes, I was already a ghost. My mother-in-law, Eleonora, materialized beside me. She smelled of expensive gin and malice. She signaled to a nearby security guard with a flick of her manicured hand. "You are pathetic," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Why are you still standing here? Do you enjoy the humiliation, security? Please escort this outsider from the premises. This is a celebration for employees and family only." And she is neither. The guard took a step toward me, his hand reaching for my arm. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was low, but it carried a steel edge that made him pause. I did not retreat. I planted my feet firmly on the marble floor, my hand tightening around my small velvet clutch. Inside lay the remote access key to the mainframe. Up on stage, Preston was basking in the adoration. He raised a glass of champagne high. "Let's talk numbers," he shouted, his face flushed with excitement. "My team and I are proud to announce that Project Titan has generated over $50 million in profit this quarter alone. This is what happens when you trim the fat. Success belongs to the hungry, not to the lazy parasites who sit at home and feed off the success of successful men." The crowd cheered again, laughing at his cruel joke. He was mocking my years of sacrifice, reducing my role as a supportive partner to that of a leech. Jessica leaned into the microphone, her eyes locking onto mine across the room. She offered a look of exaggerated, mock pity. "Oh, Preston, do not be so harsh, but it is true. Apexian welcomes talent. We simply have no room for obsolete waste." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of everything. I glanced down at the simple analog watch on my wrist. The second hand swept past the 11 and hit the 12. It was exactly 8 o'clock at night. This was the programmed time for the Apexian server farm to run its automatic forensic reconciliation, a protocol I had hard-coded into the system kernel 8 years ago to override any manual inputs. The room went silent for a split second, the air thick with anticipation. Then it happened. A loud, piercing ping erupted simultaneously from 500 pockets and handbags. It was followed by another and another, until the room was filled with a cacophony of notification chimes. Every smartphone, tablet, and smartwatch in the ballroom lit up at once, glowing like fireflies in the dark. The show was about to begin. The massive LED screen behind the stage flickered violently. The festive golden logo of Apexian Dynamics dissolved into a jagged distortion of static. In a blink, the warm holiday colors were replaced by the stark, aggressive contrast of a terminal interface blood-red text on a pitch-black background. The cheerful holiday music cut out instantly, leaving a hollow silence that was quickly filled by the hum of the cooling fans from the audio equipment. A single header slammed onto the screen in bold, capital letters, large enough for the people in the back row to read clearly: "Forensic Audit Report, Subject Preston Sterling." The crowd erupted into a confused murmur, necks craned and fingers pointed. On stage, Preston turned around to see what was happening. His face which had been flushed with triumph only seconds ago, drained of all color until he looked like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. He waved frantically at the technical booth in the mezzanine. Cut the feed. Preston screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with panic. Someone! Cut the damn feed right now. It's a glitch. But the screen did not go dark. My root access override had locked the system completely. The technicians could pull every plug in the booth. But the data was streaming directly from the cloud server I controlled. Lines of code scrolled rapidly before settling on a transaction list. It was a digital autopsy of his corruption. The report detailed every single dollar Preston had siphoned from Project Titan. The entries were not subtle. Millions of dollars were traced, flowing out of company accounts and into shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. The names of these fake companies appeared in a sub-window Eleonora Holdings, E.S. Ventures, and Sterling Prime LLC. He had been so arrogant that he had not even bothered to hide his mother's name from the laundering scheme. Then came the centerpiece of the exposé. The screen highlighted the bottom line in flashing red text. The $50 million in profit that Preston had just bragged about was a lie. The audit traced the source of those funds. They were not revenue from sales. They were high-interest loans taken out from unregulated shadow credit unions, secured against the company's future assets. He had not made the company a penny. He had buried Apexian in a mountain of toxic debt to inflate his quarterly numbers. The vice president, Jessica's father, took a stumbling step back from Preston. A new box popped up on the screen titled Negligent Approvers. His name was at the very top of the list. Preston. The vice president stammered, his eyes darting between the screen and his daughter's lover. You said those accounts were verified. You told me the audit was clean. Preston was shaking his head, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a hack, Dad. I mean, sir? Someone is framing me. I remained motionless in the shadows near the exit. The security guard who had been about to grab me had stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth hanging open as he read the screen. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from celebration to a crime scene investigation. I felt a surge of cold, precise power coursing through my veins. I slipped my phone out of my clutch. The screen showed a single blinking cursor. I typed one word, execute. I pressed enter. The speakers gave a high-pitched screech before a recorded conversation blasted through the ballroom. The audio quality was crystal clear, captured by the bug I had sewn into the lining of Preston's favorite suit jacket months ago. Don't worry, Mother. Preston's recorded voice boomed through the hall, casual and laughing. We just need to milk the accounts for another month. Then I can finally kick that stupid wife of mine to the curb. The crowd gasped in unison. On stage, Preston looked like he had been punched in the gut. But what about the assets? Eleonora's voice on the recording was shrill and greedy. Make sure she doesn't get a dime. She won't. Preston's voice replied, dripping with condescension. She is just an idiot who knows how to cook. I tricked her into signing the asset power of attorney last year. She has no idea she signed away her rights. She thinks I am a genius. Once I get the promotion, she is history. The recording ended, leaving a silence so profound that I could hear the ice melting in the untouched drinks on the nearby tables. The mask had not just slipped, it had been torn off, revealing the rotting core underneath. The silence in the ballroom was thick enough to suffocate a man, but the tension broke the moment heavy footsteps echoed from the wings of the stage. Mr. Harrison, the man the world recognized as the CEO of Apexian Dynamics, walked into the spotlight. Usually, he wore a genial smile for the press, but tonight his face was carved from granite. He looked furious. Preston saw him and practically scrambled across the stage, desperate for a lifeline. He looked like a drowning man spotting a piece of driftwood. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me, his face twisted in a mask of frantic accusation. Harrison! Thank God you are here, Preston shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. It is a cyber attack. I told you we needed better security. It is her. It is Mallory, my vindictive ex-wife. She is hacking the system to humiliate me because I left her. He turned his wild eyes toward the security team stationed at the perimeter of the room. What are you waiting for? He screamed, spit flying from his lips. She is a criminal. She is accessing confidential corporate data illegally. Arrest her, drag her out of here right now. The head of security, a massive man named Miller who had worked at Apexian for a decade, stepped forward. He began to march toward me with purpose. Preston let out a shaky, triumphant laugh. Believing his nightmare was about to end, he thought he was about to see me dragged away in handcuffs. Miller stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not grab my arm. Instead, he placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head low in a gesture of absolute, unshakable respect. "Good evening, ma'am," Miller said, his voice deep and clear enough for the stunned crowd to hear. "We have secured the perimeter as per your standing orders." Preston froze. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from Miller to me, his brain failing to process the image. On stage, Mr. Harrison raised his microphone. His voice boomed through the speakers, deep and resonant like thunder. "Preston," Harrison said, his tone dripping with disappointment. "You are making a fool of yourself, and worse. You are accusing the only person in this entire building who has the authority to fire me." A deathly stillness fell over the room. It was absolute. Not a glass clinked. Not a person breathed. Preston blinked rapidly, his face pale. "What? What are you talking about?" Preston stammered. "She is just a coder. She is nobody." Harrison ignored him. He walked down the stairs from the stage, the crowd parting for him like water. He marched straight to where I stood and stopped. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single object. It was a card, but not a standard white employee ID. It was made of solid, brushed gold. It was the chairman's key card, the master key that unlocked every door, every file, and every account in the Apexian Empire. Harrison held it out to me with both hands. "Ms. Hayes," Harrison said formally, "the board of directors has received the digital copy of the divorce papers you just signed. Your signature was the final authentication we needed. This officially activates the Conflict of Interest Exclusion Clause regarding employee Preston Sterling." I reached out and took the cold metal card. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the wedding ring I was still wearing. "Thank you, Harrison," I said softly. "The floor is yours." "Ma'am," he replied, stepping aside. I gripped the gold card and began to walk toward the stage. I did not rush. I took slow, deliberate steps. My heels struck the marble floor with a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed through the silent hall. Click, click, click. To Preston, it must have sounded like the approach of an executioner. To me, it sounded like a judge's gavel banging down, over and over again. I was no longer the crying wife in the corner. I was the storm he had been too blind to see coming. I stood on the raised podium, looking down at the man who had towered over me for 5 years. The physical distance between us was only a few feet, but the shift in power was absolute. I was no longer the shrinking woman in the corner. I was the architect of his reality, and he was just a glitch I was about to patch out. I gripped the microphone. My hand was steady. My voice did not waver. "You always told me that your dream was to meet the mysterious founder M," I said, my tone flat and cold, devoid of the warmth I used to reserve for him. "You said you admired that person more than anyone on earth. You said you admired them more than the wife who ironed your shirts and cooked your meals." Preston looked up at me, his face slick with sweat. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. He looked small. "No, that is impossible," he stammered, his voice trembling. You You are just a bookworm. You wash dishes at home. You don't know anything about business." I let out a short, bitter laugh that echoed through the silent ballroom. "That is your mistake, Preston. You saw what you wanted to see. While you slept, I wrote code. While you went out partying using money I earned. I was manipulating the stock market from our kitchen table. You fell in love with my shadow because it made you feel powerful, but you spent every single day humiliating the real me." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage. "Let me tell you the truth about Project Titan," I continued, watching the color drain from his face. "You were so proud of that project. You thought you discovered a golden goose. But Project Titan does not exist. It is a honeypot. I designed it specifically to trap corrupt executives within my own company." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. I left deliberate, fake security holes in the financial structure of that project. I explained, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. It was a test, a moral test. You could have reported the vulnerability. You could have fixed it. Instead, you saw an unlocked door and you decided to rob the house. You walked right into the cage I built for you, and you locked the door behind you. Suddenly, a shrill scream erupted from the floor. Eleonora pushed past a security guard, her face twisted in ugly rage. "You dirty liar," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Where would you get that kind of money? You are nothing. You are a penniless orphan from the gutter. My son is a star." I did not yell back. I simply gestured to the massive screen behind me. The image changed. It displayed a scanned legal document from 10 years ago. It was the original intellectual property registration for the Apexion Core algorithm. The name on the document was Clear Mallory Hayes. I may have been an orphan, I said, looking down at the hysterical woman. But I was an orphan with an IQ of 180 who built a billion-dollar algorithm before I was old enough to drink. Your son is not a star. Eleonora. He is an employee, and a very bad one. I turned my gaze to Jessica. The vice president's daughter was shrinking back against her father, looking terrified. She had wanted to be the center of attention all night, so I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. "And you, Jessica," I said softly into the microphone. "You looked at me with such pity earlier. You thought you were stealing a brilliant future director from a boring housewife. But look at him." I pointed to Preston, who was now on his knees, sobbing into his hands. "You did not steal a prize," I told her. "You just acted as an accessory to a federal crime. I hope you enjoy visiting hours in prison, because that is the only place you will be seeing him for the next 20 years. Preston looked at me with eyes that were no longer human. They were the eyes of a cornered, rabid animal. The realization that his life was disintegrating in real time snapped the last thread of his sanity. He let out a guttural roar and charged toward the stairs, his hands reaching out as if he intended to strangle the truth right out of my throat. Shut up, he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "Give me that microphone. You are ruining everything." He made it exactly 2 steps up the podium stairs before Miller and 2 other security guards collided with him. The sound of his expensive tuxedo tearing was audible even over the gasps of the crowd. They slammed him onto the hardwood stage floor, pinning his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. His face was pressed against the polished wood, right at my feet. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at him with the detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. I raised the microphone to my lips again. As the majority shareholder of Apexion Dynamics, I announced, my voice booming through the hall, "I am exercising my executive privilege. Preston Sterling is hereby terminated from his position effective immediately for gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and embezzlement." The crowd murmured, but I was not finished. I turned my gaze to the vice president, Jessica's father, who was trying to edge away toward the back exit. "And you, sir," I said, freezing him in his tracks. You are suspended indefinitely pending a full internal investigation into your negligence and potential collusion. Your access badges have already been deactivated. Before anyone could process the speed of the corporate slaughter, the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a crash that shook the walls. A dozen agents in blue windbreakers stamped with 3 bold yellow letters FBI swarmed into the room. They moved with a speed and precision that made the corporate security look slow. The guests screamed and scattered, dropping their champagne glasses. The agents did not care about the guests. They had a target. 2 of them marched straight up the stairs toward Preston. I checked my watch. Right on time. I said to Harrison, I emailed the full encrypted dossier of Preston's tax evasion and wire fraud to the New York field office exactly 1 hour ago, right around the time he was handing me a divorce settlement. The agents hauled Preston up from the floor. He was hyperventilating, his face a mask of sheer terror as the cold steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He looked at the agents, then at me, and his arrogance finally broke completely. He began to weep. Mallory. Mallory. Please, he wailed, struggling against the grip of the federal agents. Baby, look at me. I am your husband. It was just a misunderstanding. I love you. You have to help me. We are partners. We are married. He was trying to invoke spousal privilege. He thought that as long as we were legally wed, I could not be compelled to testify against him. He thought he still had a shield. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the crumpled divorce petition he had forced on me less than an hour ago. I held it up so he could see his own signature and mine, right next to each other. You are wrong, Preston, I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing. You were so desperate to be free of me that you expedited the process. By forcing me to sign this document tonight, you voluntarily waived your right to spousal immunity. You terminated our legal protection exactly 15 minutes ago. Preston stared at the paper, his eyes widening as the final nail was hammered into his coffin. He collapsed, his legs giving out, and the agents had to drag him upright. Suddenly, a screech of fury came from the side of the stage. Eleonora, witnessing her son being dragged away like a common criminal, lost all control. She lunged at me, her hand raised to strike, her face twisted into a demonic snarl. You witch, she screamed. You ruined my son. She never reached me. Harrison stepped in front of her, catching her wrist in midair. He was an older man, but his grip was iron. He shoved her back, not gently. I would be very careful if I were you. Eleonora, Harrison warned, his voice low and dangerous. The FBI agents are not just here for Preston. Your name is on every single one of those shell companies that received the stolen funds. If you touch her, I will personally make sure they add assault to your money laundering charges. Eleonora froze. She looked at the FBI agents, then at her son in cuffs, and finally at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was not just a bystander. She was an accomplice, and her house of cards had just caught fire. The federal agents dragged Preston through the center of the room. The aisle that had opened for him like a red carpet only moments ago was now a gauntlet of shame. The same executives who had laughed at his jokes 5 minutes ago now pulled back, pressing themselves against the gold-leafed walls as if he carried a contagious plague. They looked at him not with sympathy, but with the cold, self-preserving disgust reserved for a leper. As they passed the spot where Jessica stood, Preston lunged sideways, his desperate fingers grasping for the hem of her silver silk dress. "Jessica, please," he begged, his voice raw and broken, the sound of a man watching his life turn to ash. "Call your father's lawyers. Tell them who I am. You love me." Right, Jessica did not reach for him. She did not cry. She recoiled as if a sewer rat had scurried across her foot. She snatched her dress away from his touch, her eyes wide with terror. She knew that any association with him now was social and professional suicide. "Do not touch me," she hissed, backing away until she bumped into a waiter. "I barely know you. Get him away from me." I watched this display from the stage. I searched my heart for a flicker of pity, or perhaps a lingering ember of the love I had held for him for 8 years. I found nothing. There was only a vast, icy emptiness. The man I had scrubbed floors for, the man I had dimmed my own light for, was not a tragic figure. He was just a pathetic creature who had finally been exposed to the light. He had wasted my youth, but he would not waste another second of my time. Once the heavy doors slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate in the back of a federal vehicle, I turned back to the room. The silence was absolute. 500 employees stood frozen, terrifyingly unsure of what would happen next. They looked up at me, the woman they had ignored for hours, waiting for judgment. "Listen to me closely," I said into the microphone. My voice was no longer loud, it was calm, measured, and dangerous. For too long, Apex Ion Dynamics has operated under a culture of nepotism, sycophancy, and corruption. You have learned to flatter the loudest voices in the room while ignoring the people who actually do the work. That ends tonight. I scanned the faces in the front row, the managers and directors who had mocked my cheap dress earlier. They stared at their expensive Italian shoes, unable to meet my gaze. They were trembling. You may have known me as Mallory Sterling, the invisible wife. I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. But that person no longer exists. My name is Mallory Hayes. I built this company from a laptop in a basement while eating canned soup. I wrote the code that pays your salaries. And I am taking my company back. A few of the junior developers in the back, the ones who usually went unnoticed, straightened up. I could see a spark of recognition and hope in their eyes. There will be a complete restructuring. I announced. Every department head who approved Preston's fraudulent expenses will be audited by morning. If you are incompetent or corrupt, pack your desk. However, for those of you who actually work, I paused, letting the tension build. I am seizing all personal assets currently held by Preston Sterling and his accomplices. I declared, the forensic accounting team estimates we will recover roughly $3 million in liquid cash and luxury goods. This money will not go back into the corporate reserve. I looked directly at the support staff, the assistants, and the junior coders the people Preston had called parasites. This money will be divided equally as an immediate Christmas bonus for the entry-level staff and support teams who have been underpaid for years. You are the backbone of Apexion, and tonight you get your share. For a second, there was shock. Then, a single pair of hands started clapping from the back of the room. It was followed by another, and another. Soon, the ballroom erupted not in the polite, rhythmic applause of the elite, but in a thunderous, chaotic roar of genuine gratitude and awe. The sycophants in the front row clapped too, but their hands were shaking. They knew the queen had returned, and heads were going to roll. The applause eventually died down, settling into a heavy, expectant silence. I was not finished yet. I turned back to the massive LED screen one last time, with a flick of my thumb on the remote. The display shifted from the list of employee bonuses to a scanned legal document that looked terrifyingly familiar to the older woman standing near the stage. It was a property deed, stamped with a bold, red foreclosure notice. "Eleonora," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "You asked earlier where I got my money, but perhaps you should have been asking where your son got his." My mother-in-law squinted at the screen, her face pale under the heavy stage makeup. That is my house." "Why is my house on the screen?" "Because Preston needed liquidity to cover the massive holes he dug in the company funds," I explained, walking slowly down the stairs to stand on the same level as her. "He forged your signature on a high-risk mortgage loan 6 months ago. He bet your entire estate on his ability to keep stealing from me without getting caught. He lost that bet." Eleonora gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were trying to choke herself. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the plush carpet in a heap of expensive silk. "No, he wouldn't." She sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "He is my son. He said he was investing for me. He invested you into homelessness," I corrected her coldly. "The loan has defaulted as of 10 minutes ago. The bank that holds the note is a private subsidiary of my personal investment firm. I am calling in the debt immediately. The eviction notice is already on your front door." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swimming with tears. She looked old and incredibly small. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers so she could see the absolute lack of sympathy in my eyes. "You always sneered at me for being an orphan," I whispered, loud enough for the nearby executives to hear. "You mocked me for not having a home to go back to. You called me a stray dog. Well, Eleonora, now we are exactly alike. We are both women without husbands, standing in a room full of strangers. The only difference is, I own this building, and you are just trespassing." I straightened up and turned away from her sobbing form. My eyes locked onto Jessica. The young woman was trying to blend into the wallpaper, praying to be invisible. She had watched Preston get arrested and Eleonora get destroyed, and she thought her father's position would shield her. "Do not think I forgot about you, Jessica," I said. She flinched. I didn't do anything. I was just his girlfriend." I raised my phone again. The screen behind me refreshed to show a series of digital invoices. "These are purchase orders for luxury handbags and 5-star hotel suites." I listed, reading the data. They were billed to the company as marketing expenses. "And right next to Preston's signature is yours." Jessica's mouth fell open. I just signed what he told me to. I didn't know ignorance is not a legal defense for fraud," I replied sharply. "You authorized the theft of over $200,000 of corporate funds. You are not just fired. Jessica, you are blacklisted. No reputable financial firm in this country will hire a thief who steals from the company treasury to buy purses. Your career is over before it even started." The room was completely scrubbed clean. The rats had been exterminated. The parasites had been purged. I stood alone in the center of the wreckage, feeling a lightness I had not felt in years. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond band on my ring finger sparkled under the lights, a symbol of a promise that had been broken long before tonight. I gripped the ring and pulled. It slid off my finger easily. I walked over to the table where Preston had been standing earlier. His half-finished glass of champagne was still there, the bubbles flat and lifeless. I held the ring over the glass for a second, watching the light catch the gold. "Cheers," I whispered. I dropped the ring. It hit the liquid with a soft plink and sank to the bottom, settling amidst the sediment. I turned my back on the glass, on the sobbing mother-in-law, and on the ruined legacy of the sterling name. I walked away without looking back. I stood motionless against the cold floor-to-ceiling glass of the window on the 50th floor, looking down at the streets of New York City. The snow had started to fall harder, blanketing the city in white, but the scene directly below the building was painted in chaotic strokes of red and blue. The flashing lights of the police cruisers and the federal transport vans reflected against the glass, casting rhythmic, strobe-like shadows across my face. Even from this height, I could see the tiny figures of the federal agents shoving Preston and his mother into the back of the armored vehicles. The faint wail of the sirens drifted up through the winter air, a mournful sound that marked the end of their era and the beginning of mine. Harrison stepped up beside me, his presence quiet and respectful. He held the crumpled divorce papers in his hand, the edges still creased from where Preston had shoved them into his pocket. "Ms. Hayes," Harrison said softly, hesitant to disturb my thoughts. regarding these papers. Since they were signed under duress and fraudulent pretenses, I can have the legal team annul them immediately. We can tie him up in litigation for years if you prefer. I looked at the document an hour ago. Those pages had represented my destruction. They had been a weapon meant to leave me homeless and broken. Now, as I looked at my signature at the bottom, I saw something else entirely. I shook my head slowly and offered him a genuine, relieved smile. No. Harrison, I replied, my voice light and unburdened. Do not annul a thing. File them first thing in the morning. That is the most valuable document he ever gave me. It gave me back to myself. I turned away from the window, turning my back on the flashing lights and the miserable man shivering in the back of a police van. I faced the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The heavy, suffocating air of judgment and mockery was gone. In its place was a palpable sense of awe and terrified respect. As I walked back toward the center of the room, people did not look away. They watched me. They looked at me, not as the discarded wife in the old dress, but as the queen who had just reclaimed her throne. I reached out and took a fresh glass of red wine from a passing tray. I held the crystal goblet up, catching the light of the chandeliers, and looked at my reflection in a large, decorative mirror on the wall. The woman staring back was not the girl who had hidden in a basement. She was not the wife who begged for attention. She was the CEO. She was the architect. She was the one holding the pen. The band had stopped playing during the arrest, leaving an awkward silence in the room. I looked at the conductor and gave a small, permissive nod. Play, I commanded simply. The party is just getting started. The music swelled instantly, vibrant and loud. I took a sip of the wine, the rich taste settling on my tongue. I began to walk through the crowd toward the private elevators at the far end of the hall. The sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns parted for me instantly, creating a wide path. Heads bowed as I passed. No one dared to whisper. No one dared to sneer. I reached the private elevator bank and pressed the call button. The doors slid open with a smooth chime. I stepped inside and turned to face the room one last time. I saw the faces of the people who had doubted me, the people who had laughed at me, and the empty space where my husband used to stand. I felt absolutely nothing for them. I pressed the button for the penthouse suite, the highest point in the city. As the doors closed, sealing me into my own private sanctuary, I watched the party disappear from view. I was going up, rising above the noise, leaving the wreckage of my past and the man who had failed to appreciate me on the ground floor where they belonged. The elevator ascended, carrying me toward a future that was finally, completely mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel Mia Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and give us a hype to help this story reach even more people.